This is the Puck Junk Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Puck Junk Hockey Podcast. I'm Sal Berry, and with me today is Clemente Lisi, and we are going to talk about the 2024 Stanley Cup Final. We'll also talk about a card show that Clemente checked out. So, Clemente, how you doing? You went to a show.
Yeah, well, happy summer. It's officially summer. The Stanley Cup Finals are over. Yeah, I went to the Chantilly show. It was a lot of fun. 3-day show. It was 99 degrees in the Washington, D.C. area, so it was a great place to be inside. I will say, though, a few complications, not a lot of hockey. We can talk about that. Number two, it's basically a month before the National, so I think a lot of people are saving their money. A lot of the same collector pool is probably thinking, if I'm going to the National, I'm not going to go to Chantilly and spend a lot of money. But having said that, it was fun to go to a show. I hadn't been to a show in a while. And yeah, I'm excited for the National now because of it.
Yeah, that is funny. Like, it's very hard to have a show so close to the National. And I mean, we're talking like 6 weeks away. So that's far enough. But yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, Chicago kind of had the same thing where they would do their sports spectacular. They would do one in June in the years that the National was not in Chicago. And I would always go to that because, I wasn't going to go to Cleveland or Atlanta or wherever the National was going to be. But, eventually, I started going to Nationals out of state. And then even then they had like a Father's Day weekend show in Chicago like 2 years ago. And like the Thursday was okay. The Friday was like crazy good. And then the Saturday was like so slow and depressing. Like I think the show ended at 4, but by 12 o'clock, people were packing up. And by like 12:30, you started to hear the echo of like people packing, that sound when you start hearing like tables collapsing and things being hauled and stuff. So yeah, you're right about that. I mean, it's tough. It's like, so what show would succeed? Maybe like a weekend, or a one-day neighborhood show, because people will go to that regardless.
Right. Yeah, no, this was the big regional shows do suffer from the National. I did see that this year, instead of having one in Chicago, they had one in Detroit. The Detroit Sports Spectacular, which is set up for the non-Chicago years, I guess. But I heard that was pretty good. The problem with hockey, I think, this time of year specifically, is that sure it's the playoffs, but I think fall shows are so much better for hockey. I'm noticing October, November, December, the Expo, whatever, than the spring regionals. I feel like people start to lose steam, interest. And like I said, at the show, there was some hockey. There was some Bedard, of course, but there was a lot of people trotting out, Ovechkin because of the market, DC area, but also a lot of McDavid stuff because the Oilers were in the finals, right? So people were trying to capitalize on the moment, but it was mostly a football show and a baseball show, I'd say.
That's sometimes to be expected. I mean, just like we go to the Expo, and that's like 80% hockey. You know what I mean? So it's great for us, but yeah, I get it. It's a lot harder, especially I mean, so the diehards are like, oh, it's the final. I still want to buy hockey cards, and the people who collect are going to collect whether it's January or June. But like you said, people are going to also save their good stuff. I mean, I've even done this where I've had cards and I said, you know what? I'm not even going to put this in my case, at this show in March, because I know in July it's going to sell at the National. You know what I mean? Right. One year I had an Igor Shesterkin canvas young gun. And I'm like, if I sell it in Chicago in March, I'm going to get lowball offers on this. And if I bring it to the National in Atlantic City, it's going to sell. And it sold in I don't think it sold the first day. I think it sold the second day, which was the first full day, that Thursday.
Right.
And so that's the thing. So I feel like a lot of dealers are just they're not going to waste their effort, their energy, and, even to a lesser extent, their good inventory. You know what I mean? You'll spend a couple $100 setting up at the Chantilly show. I'm not sure what the price is, but you'll spend money to set up at that. But then you're also going to spend more money setting up at that other show. And it's well, why don't I just set up the other show, the national, like call it the other show,
Right.
like it's that other show, right?
Right.
So, I mean, that's where you want to bring your A game and your best stuff. And so I almost wouldn't bring things to a show like that if I was doing another big show in 6 weeks. So did you buy anything?
I bought a little bit of soccer, and I bought there were a lot of starting lineups, both loose and in packaging. And I bought some hockey ones that I thought were kind of cool that were loose, including one where Gretzky's holding the cup,
Yep.
$3. So I'm taking that. It's like
Was that loose or in package?
it was loose, but in packages it was like $10. So
Yeah, and the one in package comes with a poster. That's why I asked.
yes,
Yeah, because that was the special edition.
yeah.
Can't quite remember what the deal was on that. One of my New Year's resolutions was to inventory all of my hockey figures. It's already the end of June and I haven't done that yet.
We're basically halfway through the year. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, and actually, and the thing is that like I have a pretty good idea of like what starting lineups I have. So okay, so you bought that Gretzky with the cup. That's a nice one. What else? Any other ones?
No, that was the only one I got. And then like I said, I bought some loose soccer, a little bit of baseball, because because I do multi-sport, I don't just do hockey. I like to also parse it out by season. And also I'm going to go at the national. So I'm like, I'm not going to I spent total $60. I thought that was pretty low for me, but I thought, okay, I'm not going to spend, I'm going to be at the national for 2 or 3 days. So that was the other thing too. And I think the way I did it, a lot of people did. And I think a lot of people just didn't show up because unless that's your show and you're not going to the national, then have at it. But I can tell you at the show, there were a few Bedard young guns, but people were not running around trying to sell them. And the few that I did see in the cases were still about $800. No, I saw nobody buying them and nobody asked.
Ungraded for 800?
Ungraded, yeah, exactly. And it was just sitting there. It was almost like when you walk into a show and you see like the one guy who's got a Gretzky rookie or has got a Lemieux rookie, but he has no other hockey. It was like sitting there amid a bunch of other cards, mostly other sports. And nobody was even, I asked, I was curious. And I thought the mania must be dying down. Maybe the national will get a better idea. But I feel like if you're going to get one for 500 or less, you're going to go on eBay. I think with dealers, it's not going to work. I don't know. I think, and then not everybody had one. I think this Chantilly show, I guarantee it, or all the shows a few months back. I mean, think of the Chicago Sports Spectacular that I went to. What was that, in January? No, when was that?
March of this year?
March. That was like peak. That was crazy. And that
peak
was
Bedard, but the card had just come out like 2 weeks ago.
No, I get it. But it's funny how now a few months later, and it's really like, some people are trying to sell the Easter egg draft pick card. I don't know how much they were selling it for, but people were running around trying to sell it to dealers who didn't want them. So they didn't even want to look at it. So it's definitely cooled. And I noticed last week, I think PSA, the number of people getting it graded now has dipped a bit because the season is basically over. And I wonder if out of sight, out of mind, and maybe if he wins Rookie of the Year, or maybe if he, back in October, when things are back up and running, things are happening again. But I think for now, there's a cooling part. I don't know what's going on online, but I think there's a cooling now on him because there's so much hype. We talked about it like literally every week for, 8 weeks in a row or something. It was crazy. But I think now it's quieted down. I noticed that.
Well, not to prolong this conversation, but it just so happens that I recently wrote an article for the Hockey News about Connor Bedard mania and especially surrounding his Young Guns card. And deadlines being what they are, they wanted it by early June. So I submitted it early June. But of course, that issue is not going to go to press until the Stanley Cup Final wrapped up because it's the champion issue. And it was going to have whichever team won the championship was going to be on the cover. So obviously, with the series going 7 games, I asked my editor on the day of Game 7, I said, look, can I make a few edits to my article? Because it's almost 4 weeks since I submitted it to you, and the market changes on trading cards like day to day, week to week. So by the time it gets published, hits newsstands, hits mails boxes, so then that data would be from end of May,
right?
And it would be early to mid July. So that's ancient in card terms. So I, this morning actually, I looked up some of this information. So now an ungraded Connor Bedard Young Gun card in decent raw condition, not anything where you have like white at the top where some of it is like flaked off or like chipped or whatever, but like stuff like that where it has like a defects like that, under 200. But just when you look at it and go, yeah, that card looks great, I can't really see any flaws without pulling out a microscope, you're looking at about $200 to $250. Of course, there's some that are going to be $300, $275. There might be some that are like $195, but $200 to $250 is like where that's rubber banding. Now, when I wrote my article like a month ago, it was like a $300 card.
Right.
Looking at PSA 10 grades, it was like a $900 card a month ago for a PSA 10. Now it's a $700 to $750. This is in US dollars.
Right.
So the PSA 10 is selling for about what the Young Gun was selling for like a couple weeks after it came out. And then as far as the population report, a month ago, I want to say there were about 6,400 graded by PSA Bedard Young Guns compared to 6,100 Connor McDavid Young Guns. Well, now there's 8,457 Bedard Young Guns graded by PSA, with 3,872 of them as a PSA 10. And this is as of the day of this recording.
I'm glad that you noticed that online. I noticed it anecdotally at a show. But have you like you said though, it goes up and down. I can see this at the National shooting back up, or maybe in October. I can see it going up and down, and because it was so volatile early on and why it was so high to begin with, I'm not surprised. But then again, if you pay $900 for it raw, I feel bad for that person. But anyway.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that that's why they're selling it for $700, because they probably paid $5 or $6, and they're just like, well, I'm not going to sell it for $200. I'll just hang on to it, right?
Yeah,
so at that point, you almost just want to take it out of the case, because you're just going to get lowball offers, and nobody's going to want to pay. You're not going to want to sell it for, people will say, hey, the comps are $300, and it's like, well, I paid $600 for this.
But this is all a flipper problem. Collectors like us, we buy it, we keep it. That's it, and then doesn't move out of our collection, and it could be worth $1 or $1 million. It wouldn't matter, but it does impact when we jump in to buy it. And maybe now is a good time to buy, right? I mean, I would think maybe now is the window, but we knew this window would come.
Changing gears, how about that Stanley Cup Final?
I think the whole playoffs in general were super exciting, and they always are. I thought that maybe the finals would get to 6 or 7 games, but obviously not in that order. Florida takes a 3-0 lead, and then, Edmonton chips away, reminded me of that infamous Yankees up 3-0 on the Red Sox, and then they come back and they win. And now the Oilers were not able to complete the 4-3 and win the whole thing. But even Game 7 was 2-1. It was super tight, and I had a feeling that it might go Florida's way, only because I think home was important. I mean, it helped the Oilers, and then definitely in Game 6, and Game 6 was super exciting, I thought. And the building was crazy. It was super loud. And then Game 7 was super loud in Florida. So, I think that helped the teams. Look, in doing so, in Florida winning this, they won their first cup. We should point that out, and also avoided a historic collapse. It would have been memorable. Is it the greatest Stanley Cup Finals ever? Look, people have short memories. We always say the last one in the last 10 years are always the ones we remember, but there's been some epic ones, especially many of them have gone to Game 7. But it is pretty interesting that now Florida, which, is home to lots of sun and beaches, has won 3 Stanley Cups in 5 years, if you include the Tampa Bay Lightning. And then Canada, where hockey is a religion, the drought continues. 1993 continues on. So,
yeah, well, like I said, when Canadians say, "Oh, we deserve more teams," I said, "Well, start making babies so that you have a bigger population, and then the NHL will want to put teams there." Because I'm sorry, I know that this town in Canada of 200,000 people is really passionate about hockey, but guess what? Here's this city in the United States with 2 million people, 6 million or whatever, if you count like all the outlying whatever, right?
Metro area, yeah.
Right, exactly. And so that's the thing. Like, if you have 200,000 passionate hockey fans you might have 20% of them, or you only need to sell 20,000 tickets a game. I get it. But like, well, do you go where there's more people and try to grow the sport and then make it popular? And then you get those passionate fans. And then, I mean, would you rather have 10,000 super passionate hockey fans or 400,000 casual fans, right? It's hard to say, right?
Yeah.
But so when it's just like, oh, it's a conspiracy that they don't get the cup. Well, it's like, okay, also you have a lot of the teams buried in the same division, so.
Yeah. No, you said the C word. I don't want to say conspiracy. There's a lot of conspiracy theories. In Chantilly, I was talking to some friends of yours, some other hockey people. We were kind of laughing about the conspiracy, which is Gary Bettman's, mission in life to make sure all the warm climate teams win the cup and that the, Canadian teams don't win it. It's the kind of thing where I think, look, the Canadian hockey players are spread out, obviously, right? Except for Austin Matthews, is an American who's playing in Toronto, which is ironic, but whatever. But, from Phoenix of all places. But generally, most of the league is Canadian. Then you have the Europeans and the Americans. Okay. But yeah, I totally agree with you in terms of population. That's why, they have the teams they have. Now, personally, I didn't have a dog in the race. I did like the Oilers. I thought it would be an interesting story. As journalists, I say, both of us, we like storylines. And like McDavid winning a cup was a fun storyline. Now, I may have to rethink in my mind whether or not you need to win a championship to be considered on the Mount Rushmore of hockey. And maybe McDavid is on the Mount Rushmore after these playoffs. I want to point out he won the Conn Smythe being on the losing team. It may be the first time in maybe 30 years that Gary Bettman wasn't booed, but Connor McDavid was, because he got the Conn Smythe being on the losing side. And the last time that happened, that a skater won that on the losing team, was Reggie Leach of the 1976 Flyers. And so maybe Bobrovsky should have won it, but let's be honest, he had a really good Game 7. But the fact that in the middle, the Oilers won 3 games is because of Bobrovsky. So he had a dip in the middle of this whole run. And so maybe he doesn't deserve it. McDavid, not only is he one of the greatest, I think, an amazing player, but also broke the playoff assist record that Gretzky set. So I can see why he won the Conn Smythe. I always think it's weird for the playoff MVP, if you will, to be on the losing team is always a little bizarre.
Okay, I don't know what Reggie Leach did in 76 because I was 1 year old and I didn't actually bother to go back and watch any of those final games like later on in life.
Right.
As far as being on the losing team and being the MVP, you only really see that with goalies because usually it's the goalie plays a remarkable game or games, so we're talking like Ron Hextall in, was it 87? Right. And J.S. Giguère in 2003. And then I think Glenn Hall also won one in that 3-year span that the Blues went to the finals, right, during the expansion era. So, right. Like, you have a goalie that, like, plays amazing despite having a mediocre team in front of them or a pretty good team in front of them. I mean, the Flyers made it to the finals a couple times that decade. So they weren't necessarily a mediocre team. It's just that compared to the Oilers, everybody was a mediocre team back then.
Yeah.
You just can't like, okay, so here's my thing. The fact that Gary Bettman had to qualify giving McDavid the award by saying this goes to the playoff MVP.
Yeah.
Not just for their performance in the final. And I'm paraphrasing, right, but it's like he had to say that. Because I remember when Patrick Kane won the Conn Smythe, we were all like, Patrick Kane, really? I mean, he was just kind of okay in the final. But then we're like, well, he led the team in scoring for the whole playoffs. And yeah, he did have some really good games. And maybe he wasn't as good in the final, but it wasn't like he was bad. I just wasn't like, he didn't seem like, okay, that's the obvious choice until it was made. Then it's like, yeah, okay, I could see that, right? Like, I could see the argument for that, right? So, like, if Bobrovsky won the Conn Smythe trophy, we'd all be like, yeah, okay, I could see the argument for that. He kind of didn't do so good in that game where they lost 8-1, and okay, he allowed like 4 or 5 goals that game. But yeah, I mean, to give it to a skater on the losing team and then have to say, well, he did really good in the other games and not just the finals. It's like, okay, yeah, great. You smothered the Kings in the first round. You go. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
No,
Like,
so I looked up Reggie Leach, and he had scored 24 points in those playoffs, 19 goals. So I can see why you would give it to kind of like McDavid. You score a lot, you have a lot of assists throughout the whole playoffs. But you're right, no one remembers that first round when you knock out whoever. They remember just these 7 games, and maybe the Conn Smythe needs to be those 7 games and not the whole playoffs anymore. But then there is no playoff award, and I get that too. And it happens so rarely that they give it to the losing team, that maybe it's not even worth as a talking point. It is today because, like I said, it's rare, and maybe it won't happen for another 20 years. Who knows? But
right.
it just shows you the abilities and the powers of of a McDavid. Now, you were talking hobby a little bit. Maybe I'll interject hobby. Look, McDavid already has a high ceiling. His cards are worth a lot already. But I think in losing this series, the players that saw their value increase will be like Sidney Crosby. I think Sidney Crosby may be better than McDavid. Who knows? Some people believe that. And so Sidney Crosby has a cup. Ovechkin has a cup. These guys have high card values. I can see people outside this series benefiting. We know it's not going to be Bobrovsky because goalies get hot in the playoffs. Their cards get really expensive for like 10 minutes. Then they dip back down where they always go. And so it's not going to be goaltenders here. And so it won't be Skinner even, who also had a good playoff if you think about it. He got this far too. You have to have good goaltending in the playoffs. And the Oilers always had bad goaltending the last couple of years. And look, let's not forget, when we were at the Expo, I don't know if you remember, they were like in the middle of a losing streak. They had fired their coach. It was terrible. And then everyone's like, oh, this will be like the Blues. Like they'll bring in a new coach and they'll turn around and win the whole thing. And they almost did. They almost did. And so kudos to Florida. This warm weather thing, it feeds the conspiracy theory. It makes for a good story. I don't know. It's just that, what it is? There's more talent spread out. Let's be honest. Florida was really good last year. They were the 8th seed last year. They knocked off the Bruins last year, the number 1 seed, had the record for the best regular season record, and got deep and didn't win it. So they were due. They built a strong franchise. They have the players. I think this may see Matthew Tkachuk's values go up. I think he's very underrated. And maybe if he was playing in a different market, it wouldn't be. But it is. And I think Matthew Tkachuk, I pointed out to you that he brought the cup to the beach and he went in the water with him. And this is where you get to see in the offseason all the players who spend like a week with the cup do all kinds of crazy things with it. And I thought, a day with the cup card will be so cool. He's standing, waist high in the water, holding the cup in the air. And then all I can think about was the early 90s Upper Deck cards where they were actually posing at the beach. So maybe if we get Matthew Tkachuk to rollerblade down the boardwalk with the cup after being in the water, then maybe we'll have some really fun cards. But just goes to show you, it's just you never know what market could win it. I didn't think Florida would win the cup in September. I didn't think they were going to win it when the playoffs started. I thought it was going to be the Rangers or maybe the Oilers or Toronto or Colorado or Dallas. Pick a team. Boston, I did not have Florida going all the way. So it goes to show you, I think the NHL playoffs are the most difficult and the most unpredictable, which I think is ultimately for the sport the best thing.
So a few stats about Sergei Bobrovsky during these playoffs. All right. So his record was 16-8. So you go, okay, 16 wins, but 8 losses, but it's the 16 wins that matter. And he was the guy. Even if they lost, they weren't like, all right, we're going to put in a backup. You know what I mean? They had Stolarz. Anthony Stolarz was their backup on the bench, I believe. And then they still have Spencer Knight in the mix.
There was talk that he might miss game 7, and then he was there and he had a great game. So you're right.
So 16-8, he had a goals allowed average of 2.32, which was 4th overall in the playoffs. He had 2 shutouts, which was 1st overall among goalies in the playoffs. And then he had a save percentage of .906, which was 6th. So some of those stats, not so great. You could look and say, yeah, 2.32, that's pretty good. But then when you go, well, that's 4th, right?
Right.
But then again, look at the sample size. When you play 24 games, you're going to have a few stinkers in there, right? Right. You could be a goalie and you could lose every game 2-1 and your team could get swept. And they go, okay, 2.00 goals allowed average, right? That's not bad. But you lost those 4 games, right? But then when you have a larger sample size, you're going to have those games where, you know what, you're going to get roasted in a game here and there. It happens. It happens during the playoffs. I mean, even the Oilers in the 80s, man, I mean, they'd win games like 8-7.
Right.
You know, and granted, your stats didn't look great.
But they won.
But they won, right?
Yeah.
So, honestly, I could see the argument for Bobrovsky winning the Conn Smythe Trophy. I think it's kind of weird. I get that McDavid set a record, but it's like you set a record and your team still lost. And he didn't really do anything in those last two games. Game 3 was the turning point for the Oilers because they got 2 goals in that third period. They pulled within one goal. They still lost 4-3, but McDavid set up those 2 goals in the third period. And then that's when it seemed to like start clicking for them, right? Like, okay, like he figured it out. And in game 4, that's when they trounced the Panthers 8-1. And in game 5, they won 5-3, 1 empty net goal. So really like a 4-3 win. But, you know, it was like, you know, when teams say it, and it's so cliche, but when players say, we just have to play our game, that's what Florida had to do. And when they were playing Edmonton's game, they were losing by 2, 3, 7 goals. And when they played their game, they were winning by 1 goal. I mean, look at game 1. They won 3-0, but one was an empty net goal. So really like a 2-0 win. Second game, they won 4-1. Again, 1 empty net goal. So a 3-1 win. Again, 2-goal win, right? Game 3, they won by 1 goal. 4, they lost. 5, they lost. 6, they lost. You know, and 4 and 6 were pretty big losses. Then 7 was like a 2-1 win, right? So they just had to do that New Jersey Devils thing where they just smother you, where they clog up the center of the ice, you know, and make it hard for, you know, the Oilers to get their shots. And then even like during the broadcast, at least here in the United States, they said, you know, Bobrovsky's been really good, but he hasn't really faced many high danger chances thus far. And I think this was like the second period. And it's just like, okay, well, that's a team thing, right? Like if your team is giving up a lot of those high danger chances, then they're not doing their job. And that's why I think back to like, say, 2019 when the Blues won, when they beat the Bruins. And I think about Jordan Binnington's play in the first period of game 7. And I said to myself, it's like the Blues don't want to win this game. The only Blue that wanted to win that game was Binnington, and he stood on his head, you know, and then of course they went ahead and they won the game. They beat the Bruins. But yeah, so just funny how once Florida went back to doing what they were doing all along, then they win the cup. I'm happy for them. I wanted to see McDavid win a cup, just like I wanted to see Ovechkin win a cup. I wanted him to win that cup, like I wanted Crosby. As a fan of hockey, you want to see the greats do great things, right? Like you think of Mario Lemieux, but then if he never won a cup, you'd be really bummed about it. Or Steve Yzerman, right? I remember when it seemed like forever that Steve Yzerman was not going to win a cup. The Red Wings sucked for like the first 4, 5, 6 years of his career. Then they were okay. And then there was that year they got swept by the Devils and you go, oh my God, right? And then they finally figured it out and then they won their, you know, back-to-back cups and then another one in 2002. And, you know, so you want to see the greats do great. In a way, though, I feel like Florida's not going to repeat. And I feel that it's really on Edmonton now because they got within 1 game, within 1 goal, and they proved that they could do it and that they have the right people to do it. And I don't know who's a UFA or an RFA or whatever, but the only thing is if they improve their goaltending, I think they could do it. That's it. Everything else is working for them. I don't understand how teams can make trades during the playoffs because you look at like that big trade that sent Linus Ullmark to the Ottawa Senators.
Right.
I mean, who's to say that Edmonton wouldn't have made an offer, you know, but they can't obviously trade while they're in the playoffs, right? So, you know, he could have been like the piece that they need.
No, but I think over the summer, if you're the Oilers, that's what you're thinking. We have the offense, though I think Draisaitl might have a year or 2 left on his contract. McDavid has 3. That's fine. But I think you're right. The goaltending, they need to go out there and get like an Ullmark, a Shesterkin, like somebody who's going to be so secure in the back that's going to help them because great goaltending would have been a difference here. And Bobrovsky, with all his faults, was able to get Florida where they got in addition to all the other stuff they were doing. Oilers did not have that. And in the end, Look, they came back from 3 down to make this a real series. I thought, wow, if the Panthers sweep here, this will just be really boring and bad. And I thought, okay, they pulled one. Okay, two. Uh-oh, they tied it. This is crazy now, you know? And so it's always nice to have a game 7. In the end, I think these little things, if you're the Oilers, for example, bringing Paul Coffey and making him an assistant coach when they were down back in October, that totally helped. These little things help them, but in the end, they just, it's like when a swimmer loses by 1/10 of a hundredth of a second or whatever. It's like so close, but someone has to finish second, and that was them. But McDavid, kudos to him. He's still a star and is still a stud. So who knows? But I want to mention another player that had a wild stat, which is Corey Perry, who has now lost in the Stanley Cup Finals 4 times in 5 years with 4 different teams: the Oilers, the Ducks, the Stars, and the Canadiens. Which maybe that's a common denominator. Do not have Corey Perry in your team if you want to win the Cup next year.
I think the teams that lost had bigger problems than whether or not Corey Perry was in the lineup, right? Like, you
True.
look at, who did the Stars and the Canadiens lose to? The Lightning.
Right.
That's a stacked team. I'm sorry. I mean, that you look at their top 3 of Stamkos, Hedman, and Vasilevsky, and you go, wow.
So I should say then, if you're a team and you have Corey Perry on the roster and you're facing a Florida team, then you're in trouble. Maybe.
Right. Wait, so what teams was he on? He was on, obviously, the Ducks when he won.
The Canadiens.
Stars. Was he on the Lightning also, the year they lost?
I don't think so. For any player to lose that many is just sort of really disappointing. And you're right, it's a team game. We talk a lot about individuals, not just today, the playoffs and the hobby. We talk about individuals, but these are all people that are members of other teams. And you're right, that dynamic matters. But often, unfortunately, we like to talk about individual players and not so much teams, because teams change all the time. And individual players kind of have a trajectory, a career that we want to sort of put into context. And so it's just a wild stat. But yeah, it's kind of a crazy thing.
Actually, Corey Perry was on the Lightning the year that they lost to the Avalanche. Yeah, just looking that up right now.
He was on the wrong Lightning team then.
The thing, though, is that, I think what that proves more than anything is he's not a bad luck charm. It's the teams that are competitors, that are competitive, that are contenders, I should say this is a guy that can help us.
Right. Yeah, he's a utility player. You bring him in because he's been in the playoffs before. He can get you far. I get it. No, I get that.
Yeah, that's depressing when you keep going to the finals, or you think of Marian Hossa, those first 2 finals appearances.
But then you think of a player like Yager, who won the Cup his first 2 years. It's like, wow, it doesn't get better than that. And it maybe didn't for him, but, in terms of team. But yeah, it's sometimes you just have to click. You have to be on the right team, and it works,
Yeah. Other things too. I was surprised that Matthew Tkachuk was not more of a force in these finals. In fact, looking at the Panthers during the final, there wasn't really one player, at least in my mind. Somebody could pull up the stats and say, well, this guy had 3 goals or whatever. But first game, first goal, Carter Verhaeghe, and you're like, all right, this guy's doing good. So what do? I go on eBay, I start looking at Carter Verhaeghe Young Guns, and I go, oh, they're only $6 to $10, okay. And then he doesn't do anything really until that last game when he sets up a goal. It was really a team effort. Last year, if the Panthers forced a 6th game, I would have said that Matthew Tkachuk would have been the MVP of last year, even if they lost, because he was just dragging that team. This year, it's like they didn't need that from him. He was still a leader. He was still an important player on the team. Everybody was important. You look at how good Barkov played. There's that one game where he made McDavid look like a junior player. But then there was other days where McDavid made the whole Panthers team look like junior players. So, that's the thing. There was no one Panthers player other than maybe Bobrovsky. And maybe that's another reason why the Conn Smythe went to McDavid. Either that or they already made the engravement plaque and they were just can't change it now. We already engraved his name on it,
Think about it. Game 7 had no influence on who won that because McDavid, right? So you're right. Maybe at Game 6 they were like, well, look, nobody could do anything in Game 7 that can displace McDavid. So get that thing going. Let's get it printed up, And you're right. Maybe that's what
Yeah.
Maybe but it's logistical more than anything. Look, the data makes sense. The stats make sense. It's just that
Yeah.
it's funny that here we are the day after the Cup, and we're talking about McDavid winning the Conn Smythe, and we're not really talking about Florida or some other pieces. I mean, we're talking about those things, but this is still a major talking point because I think it took the crowd by surprise. I mean, like they were muting the telecast because there was some crazy chanting, I'm sure, because you were in Florida's building, of course, and so yeah, and if you're McDavid, how excited are you to win an individual award when you want to win the Cup?
He had already left the ice. I mean, I remember other times when the players would stand and watch the presentation and stand and watch, one of them would get an MVP award or whatever. So I think I'm tapped out of things to talk about with the finals. What about you?
Yeah, no, I think we covered it. We were exhausted. It was a fun playoffs and maybe one of the most anticipated Game 7s in recent memory for sure. But it was fun. I had a great time.
Why don't you tell our listeners about the recent article that you just had published for Sports Collectors Digest?
You got to give me more hints than that. You got to give me more.
Oh
hints.
yeah, I'm sorry. You're like a regular. Okay, well, first of all, and I know this is a baseball topic, but you wrote about Willie Mays.
Yes, he had a birthday a few months back. It ran in the current issue, and then he, as everyone knows, died recently. And it was his, top 10 collectible cards. Which then, in the end, you sent me a message, and it was prescient. I mean, he was obviously elderly and could have died at any time. But the timing, sometimes in journalism, the timing just works, and sometimes it doesn't work. But yeah, I know it's a hockey podcast, but a beloved figure, of course. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to interject a quick story. I had written a piece for the Hockey News. This was just for my In the Cards article. This was back in whatever year Gordie Howe passed away. And right. I wrote a little In the Cards article about Gordie Howe appearing on the card with his two sons, the WHA card with Mark and Marty Howe, and it said the Howes. And so I wanted to time that with Father's Day. And so I sent my article in and, filed it with the images and stuff. And
right.
And
then real life happens.
Gordie passed away.
Right.
And then my editor messaged me that morning. He said, do you want to rewrite this article? I said, yeah, I think I should. Yeah. So then instead of it being like this Father's Day article, it was like an in memoriam kind of article. I have the original layout of the page. They sent it to me.
The proofs, yeah.
Yeah, to proof it. But then, so it's like there's like an unpublished version of that article, that was like happy and fun and a little upbeat, and then the other one had to be like more like in reverence or
somber, retrospective. Yeah, no, it's true. I wrote this piece a few months ago, and it ran in the last issue. But you're right, I could have ran the same issue where. In that case, I would have to rewritten the first 4 or 5 paragraphs. But yeah, sometimes, you're really happy with your article, you're ready to move in, and then all of a sudden things happen in the world and changes what you're doing. Because like you mentioned earlier, you do these things often with some lead time. No, I think you're talking about in terms of my latest hockey piece was the piece on the new Upper Deck Fleer Skybox EX 2000 set that you guys had a podcast on recently, which was great. And I interviewed same people for it, and and it was one of the more fun stories I've done recently because of this whole thing where it's like a hockey set that's 27 years in the making, sort of. It's like, hey, here we are. We were gonna do this back then. We never did one for hockey. We did one for football and basketball and baseball. And we and here we are getting the same people back together. Get the band back together at Upper Deck to make the set, which is great. And, it's also another Bedard set. If you think about it, there's other Bedard rookies in this set, or parallel rookies, or whatever you want to call them. I think it's a really fun set. Like you guys talked about, the design is good. I think it's up there. I think it's going to do really well when it comes out. I think it's going to be very popular. I think it's like the Metal Universe in that sense, where collectors really will gravitate towards it. And stories like that are fun. And, and I think it's going to be a big set that people are going to talk about in the coming weeks and months. But I also think it's going to be one of those where people might want to put the whole set together, which I point out in my piece. And that doesn't happen that often anymore, other than maybe with Flagship. But what do you think of the set?
I like it so far. I mean, I like the look of it. I love 90s stuff.
Right.
I dipped out in the late 90s, as I've mentioned a million times.
So did I. So for me, it feels almost like I'm living an era that I had already, post junk wax, where I'd already sort of had taken a big break from the hobby. Yeah.
Now that reminds me, because they say never, right? Like, so this set was supposed to come out and it didn't. And I think about like other sets that I would love to see. Well, I don't know about love, because now I think about it, too much time has passed and maybe I wasn't that enamored with it. I mean, I love Pro Set, and there was a 92-93 Pro Set Series 1. There was never a 92-93 Pro Set Series 2. But I don't really feel like Pro Set Series 1 is lacking that much, because I think they put all the big names in there because I think they kind of knew what was going on. They put all their effort behind Parkhurst, and I was told that what was going to happen was, if Pro Set had continued as a company into the 93-94 season, Parkhurst was going to become their go-to flagship brand, and they were going to do Parkhurst football and hockey, and they weren't doing basketball or baseball at the time, but
Right.
that was going to become their go-to brand. So so that's why they really pushed the 92-93 Parkhurst set with the Series 1, a Series 2, and a final update. So think about that as being like a lost set that never happened. And I think of like 94-95 Score, which never had a Series 2, and it really needed a Series 2 because it didn't put a lot of great players in Series 1. It only put like half of the great players in Series 1 because they were really anticipating a Series 2. But of course, this is like going back in time and like making cards of like retro players, and that's almost never going to happen now. But like with like taking an old design and then like just putting new players in it, I mean, that's been done a lot, but doing it with something that never happened but should have, that's pretty cool.
It's like, because it's retro, but you've never seen it. So it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, I know you're not going to be on the next couple of podcasts. Are you at liberty to say where you're disappearing off to?
Oh, I'm not in the witness protection program. I promise. No. What? So a long anticipated family vacation with my wife and kids. We're going to be in the UK for about a week and a half. So that'll be fun. And so that'll take me 5-6 hours in a different direction. So I won't be on the podcast. And then I'm doing a journalism trip. First time ever. I will be in India and Indonesia.
Wow.
So in the middle of the month. So for most of July, I won't be around. And then I get back just in time to be home for about a week. And then the national starts. So I'll be in Cleveland for that. So if anyone's wondering where I am, this is where I'll be. I'm not missing in action. I'm not in the witness protection program, as some people have said to me, like, where are you going? What's the big mystery? I'm like, it's not a mystery. It's just work trip and vacation, and it's all wrapped into one.
So are you bringing your family with you to India and Indonesia as
No,
well?
that I'm going with some colleagues, but never been to that part of the world, so I'm super excited. I love to travel.
Is that going to be a sports related story, or
no? That's more like a teaching journalism thing, yeah. And so, but as you know, wherever I go, I like to look for stories. So maybe there'll be stories there. You never know. But this is my second time being in the UK this year. I went to the London Card Show. I'm not going for a card show this time. This time I'm actually going sightseeing, and that'll be fun. And I don't know if you've ever been to the UK, but it's fun because you're in a foreign country, but English is a dominant language. You don't need to worry about language barriers or anything like that. So that's fun. I know that traveling in the summer is rough because though in the UK it's not as hot as it's been on the East Coast of the United States, it is hot in Asia and other parts of the world. So but I'm super psyched for it. And then, like I said, I'll see you at the National. I hope to see our listeners at the National. We run into lots of people there, and it'll be a lot of fun. And I'll be there for a few days. So
yeah. So let me just throw out a little bit of information on the National. So if you're coming to the National and you want to find me, as I've said before, I set up with AU Sports and Memory Lane. So it looks like I'm going to be at booth number 700. Now, I might be at the one next to it. It's like 4 booths smashed together to make one booth. So usually Memory Lane, they're facing the entrance and I'm facing away from the entrance. They're probably going to stick me in at 700, which is right on the aisle and the aisle. So like, say you like walk in and you're going to beeline towards the upper deck booth, you will pass me. And that'd be good because, I definitely want to say hi to people who listen to the podcast. It's always great when people drop in and say like, oh, I love the show, love the podcast. Clemente usually, when he's not like out, like finding all these great deals to buy, he'll hang out at the booth, so he's around, he'll be around, but he'll also be finding $1 autographs.
By the way, I'm interjecting because when I was in Chantilly, I ran into some friends of yours, and
Yep.
so
Or you could say friends of ours.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah, friends of ours, Diane and Paul, if you're listening. Yeah, thanks for dinner. It was fun. But I did tell them the story about how you acquired that triple leaf auto that had Yager and Lemieux, so I am fishing for deals, looking for deals, and oftentimes, not even for me, they're for Sal, for some other people. But yeah, that was a fun story. I know we told that on the podcast, I think.
I love the way you were trying to get to that card, and you were like, standing up really straight, almost on your tippy toes, doing this like you're like trying to look over the crowd. Like it was like the commuter in the pack of tourists, where you're just like, I just want to get around this group of people that are stopping and looking at the Empire State Building. Right. Like, and it was great. It was so funny because like you were so like laser focused, and when you just like that guy turned, and it's all. You ride the train, right? Have you ridden the train before?
Yes, of course. The subway. So
so you know how it is.
I needed that little inch
where you just need to squeeze in. That person turns a little bit, and that's all you need to squeeze onto the train.
Right.
Or okay, I'm going to squeeze by you, and then there's this little air pocket here where I can like stand. You know what I mean? And so that was like the funniest thing. The guy just turned a little bit, and you were just. Grabbed it
because the guy turned to say, "Hey, look, hockey cards," and that's when I went in. I knew where the card was. I handed it to you like I was doing like a lateral in football, and then you went up to the guy and paid for it. And I think the people that were there had no clue what happened. Like they were like, "What?" Because I think if they got to that card, they would have bought it.
Oh yeah, Mario Lemieux, Jaromir Jagr, and Kevin Stevens triple autograph for $100. I mean that was a great. That was a great card. I mean, that's on my display case right now. In fact, I have enough Leaf cards in my display case that I think I just need to put them all on the same, I don't want to say shelf. It's like a display case with like 4 shelves. Well, there's like 4 shelves, but then I put risers in there so that I could break up those shelves further. And each like section holds like 12 cards. And I look and I go, well, I bought a Tom Barrasso autograph recently, and I bought a Chris Chelios autograph. I have a lot of his autographs, but I have one that's like this Art of Hockey card, and it's numbered 1 out of 4. So I'm like, I need to put these, like make like a Leaf shelf or whatever, because they do good stuff. I mean, we like to bemoan, they don't have logos, but you know what? When they do it right, they do it right.
I totally agree, especially when we talk about legend players. But the funny thing is that, we talk about this all the time too, is the cards are fun. Sometimes the stories behind the cards are even more fun. And that one's, I'm sure every time you look at that comes to mind,
And when you guys found those really old vintage cards from like the 30s, and then we like walked over there, and I don't know, you said some funny comment like, I feel like we're in a gang or something.
All 3 of us were walking. All you need to do was slow it down a bit and have some background music. It was like very like we were all on a mission. Like we walked over there like a gang, like a card gang. We went over there, and then you and Tim bought cards. You bought those cards. Like it was just. And it's stuff like that. And even this weekend in Chantilly, like I didn't buy a whole bunch, but it was just the hanging out part. And it reminded me of the Expo and the National, where we do a lot of that. And I'm just looking forward to that because I think it's just so much fun.
So anyways, folks, if you're coming to the National, definitely let us know. I mean, you could even send us a message on social media. We're both on X, a.k.a. Twitter, a.k.a. whatever you want to call it. I'm at Puck Junk, and Clemente Lisi is at Clemente Lisi, which is very clever. Good username because it makes sense. But any last words before we wrap this one up and call it a podcast?
No, I mean, I'll miss hockey for a while, but I think the collecting part always keeps me going in the summer. And then before you know, we're going to be doing a season preview, which we did back in October. It feels like it was just last week. So stay tuned.
All right. Well, happy trails, my friend, and I will see you at the National. And to everyone else, thank you for listening to the Puck Junk Hockey Podcast. As always, if you've enjoyed the show, please be sure to like and subscribe. Please be sure to spread the word. If you'd like to sponsor this podcast, you could do so by purchasing a t-shirt at shop.puckjunk.com. And until next time, collect what you like.
For more hockey goodness, follow us on Twitter at PuckJunk.